Dae-ho Kim stared out the large window of Nexus Station, watching the stars drift by. 6 months had passed since he left Earth to join the first group of human emergency responders in space. The massive space station, home to 12 different alien species, spun slowly to create artificial gravity that felt almost like home. Almost, but not quite. He adjusted the collar of his red emergency response uniform, still not used to how the special fabric felt against his skin. The material was designed to protect against both extreme heat and cold, yet it felt lighter than his old firefighting gear back on Earth. "Officer Kim, your presence is required in Training Room 7, the station's AI announced through his communicator. Dae-ho sighed and turned away from the window. Another day of trying to explain human emergency protocols to beings who didn't understand why anyone would risk their life for strangers. He walked through the curved corridors, nodding to the tall, crystal-like Narai who passed by. Their bodies sparkled under the station's lights, making them look like walking diamonds. The training room door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, a group of Narai safety officers stood in perfect formation, their crystalline bodies arranged by height. At their head stood Hae-Nul, the station's chief safety coordinator. "You are 3 minutes early, Officer Kim," Hae-Nul said, his crystal face catching the light. "This is inefficient use of your time." Dae-ho couldn't help but smile. "On Earth, we say better early than late. Illogical. Being exactly on time is the optimal choice," Hae-Nul replied, but Dae-ho noticed the slight blue tint in his crystal structure, a sign that the Narai was amused. The training session began with Dae-ho explaining Earth's fire rescue protocols. He pulled up holographic images of burning buildings and rescue operations. "But why enter the structure at all?" one of the younger Narai asked. "If the building's inhabitants chose to remain in a dangerous situation, the logical course would be to let nature take its path." "Because every life has value," Dae-ho said firmly. "On Earth, we believe that helping others isn't about logic. It's about doing what's right." The Narai officers exchanged glances, their crystal bodies reflecting light in a cascade of colors that showed their confusion. Hae-Nul stepped forward, his voice carrying the mechanical precision typical of his species. "Officer Kim's species has an interesting perspective on risk assessment," Hae-Nul explained to his team. "While their approach defies conventional efficiency algorithms, their success rate in emergency situations is remarkably high." Dae-ho played a video of a rescue he participated in back in Seoul. The Narai watched in silence as he and his old team ran into a burning apartment building, emerging minutes later with a family of 5. "Your protective equipment seems primitive compared to our crystalline structures," another officer observed. "Yet you choose to enter dangerous situations. This seems contradictory." "Sometimes the biggest risks bring the most important rewards," Dae-ho explained. He touched the scar on his left hand, a reminder of his first rescue. "We have a saying, fear is natural, but courage is a choice." The training session continued, but Dae-ho could tell his words weren't really getting through. The Narai were brilliant beings, capable of surviving in conditions that would kill most species instantly. Their crystalline bodies could withstand extreme temperatures, and their logical minds could solve complex problems in seconds. But they couldn't understand why someone would choose to put themselves in danger for others. As the Narai filed out of the training room, Hae-Nul stayed behind. "Officer Kim, your methods are unusual, but I believe there is value in studying them. Would you be willing to share more of your experiences?" Dae-ho smiled. It was a small step, but it was progress. "Of course. How about we start with why I became a firefighter in the first place?" Hae-Nul's crystal structure shifted to a curious green. "That would be interesting. Though I must warn you, I may ask many questions that seem obvious to you." "That's okay," Dae-ho said, looking out at the stars again. "Sometimes the obvious things are the most important ones to understand." Little did either of them know that very soon, Those differences in their approach to emergency response would be tested in ways none of them could imagine. 2 weeks after the training session, Daho sat in the station's observation deck with Haenul, sharing his lunch break. While Daho ate his rice and kimchi, Haenul absorbed mineral nutrients through his crystalline structure. "Your eating process seems very inefficient," Haenul said, watching Daho use chopsticks. "Why not simply consume nutrition tablets?" "Because food isn't just about staying alive," Daho replied, offering Haenul a piece of kimchi, which passed right through his crystal body. "It's about enjoying life." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft alarm. Haenul's body flickered with green light, the Narai equivalent of a smile. "It's time for my weekly visit to the education center. Would you like to join me?" Daho had heard about the Narai Education Center, but had never visited. "I'd like that," he said, packing away his lunch. They walked through the station's crystal-lined corridors to a large, dome-shaped room. Inside, young Narai floated near the ceiling, their small crystal bodies still partially transparent. Unlike adult Narai who stayed in humanoid forms, the children shifted shapes freely, becoming stars, spheres, and abstract patterns. "They're beautiful," Daho whispered. "They are in their most vulnerable stage," Haenul explained. "Young Narai haven't fully developed their heat resistance. Their crystal structures are still soft and forming." A small group of children floated down to examine Daho. Their bodies sparkled with curious purple lights. One brave little one, who introduced herself as J1, shifted into a rough human shape. "Why is your body so soft?" J1 asked, poking Daho's arm. G1, the teacher, Sunme, called out. "We do not touch other species without permission." Her crystal form glowed with embarrassment. "It's okay," Daho laughed. "I'm soft because humans are made of different stuff than Narai. We're not as tough as you, but we can adapt and change in other ways." The children gathered around as Daho showed them pictures of Earth's firefighters. They were especially fascinated by the water hoses. "But why use water?" one child asked. "It's so primitive. Sometimes the old ways work best," Daho explained. "Water might be simple, but it gets the job done." Haenul watched the interaction with interest. "The children seem drawn to you," he observed, "perhaps because you show emotions similar to their own. Adult Narai don't show emotions. We learn to suppress them as we mature. Emotions are seen as a sign of incomplete development." Daho watched the children play, their bodies creating beautiful light patterns in the air. Maybe emotions aren't such a bad thing to keep. As they left the education center, Haenul's usually perfect crystal form showed tiny ripples, a rare sign of uncertainty. "Your species confuses me, Daho. You are physically weak compared to us, yet you choose dangerous professions. You eat inefficient food, show emotions freely, and value things that cannot be measured. And that's exactly why we're good at what we do," Daho said. "Sometimes you need to think with your heart, not your head." "Hearts don't think," Haenul stated matter-of-factly. "Maybe not literally," Daho smiled. "But they can help us make the right choices when logic isn't enough." As they walked back to their posts, neither of them noticed the small maintenance droid malfunctioning near the station's power core, its circuits slowly overheating. In just a few hours, this tiny malfunction would test everything they had discussed about logic, emotion, and the true meaning of courage. The first sign of trouble came during the station's night cycle. Daho was checking his emergency equipment when the lights flickered briefly. Most crew members didn't notice, but his firefighter's instinct made him uneasy. "Computer, run a diagnostic on power systems," he requested. "Power systems operating within normal parameters," the AI responded. "Minor fluctuation detected in Section 7B. Maintenance crews notified." Daho frowned. Section 7B was near the education center. He grabbed his handheld scanner and headed that way, telling himself he was probably being too careful. Better safe than sorry, as humans like to say. In the education center, Sunmai was teaching a group of young Narai about their species' history. The children floated near the ceiling, their crystal bodies forming complex patterns as they learned. Ji-won noticed Daeho first and waved, her form sparkling with happy blue lights. Officer Kim, Sunmai acknowledged him. Is there a problem? Just checking something, he said, watching his scanner. The power readings were slightly higher than normal, but nothing alarming. Then he smelled it, a faint odor that reminded him of burning plastic. Most aliens couldn't detect it, but human noses were surprisingly good at catching the early signs of fire. Sunmai, how many children are here today? 17, she answered, her crystal form showing confused patterns. Why do you? The lights flickered again, longer this time. Daeho's scanner suddenly showed a massive power spike. Everyone needs to leave, he said firmly. Now. Before Sunmai could respond, a loud boom shook the station. The wall near the power conduit began to glow with an eerie purple light. This wasn't regular fire. It was plasma fire, much more dangerous and harder to control. Children, form your travel pattern. Sunmai called out. The young Narai began to arrange themselves in their evacuation formation, but they moved too slowly. Their crystal bodies flickered with fear orange. The plasma fire burst through the wall in a wave of purple-white energy. The room's automatic doors slammed shut, a safety feature gone wrong, trapping them inside. The temperature began to rise rapidly. The safety systems aren't responding. Sunmi's voice carried genuine fear now. Adult Narai could handle extreme heat, but the children's developing crystal structures were far more fragile. Daeho hit his emergency communicator. This is Officer Kim. We have a Class P fire in the Education Center. Section 7B, multiple young Narai trapped. Requesting immediate response. Haenul's voice came through quickly. Plasma fire containment teams are responding. Do not attempt intervention. Repeat, do not attempt intervention. The temperature levels are beyond human survival range. The plasma fire spread across the ceiling, creating a deadly barrier between the children and the exit. Some of the young Narai were starting to crack from the heat, their crystal bodies showing stress lines. We can't wait, Sunmai said, her own form starting to show signs of strain. The children's structures are destabilizing. Daeho looked at his scanner again. The temperature was far beyond what his standard gear could handle. The station's plasma containment teams were at least 10 minutes away. The children had less than 5. He thought about his experimental protection suit, still in testing. It might work, or it might fail completely. Looking at the terrified children, their bodies glowing orange with fear, he knew there was only one choice he could make. Logic said to wait. Protocol said to wait. But as Haenul had observed, humans didn't always follow logic. Sometimes they followed their hearts instead. The plasma fire turned the education center into a deadly trap. The purple flames climbed higher, creating patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so dangerous. Through the chaos, Daeho watched in horror as small cracks appeared in the children's crystal bodies. Officer Kim stepped back from the door. A calm voice ordered. Ta-jun, the station security chief, had arrived with a team of Narai engineers. Their adult crystal bodies glowed with a protective blue shield. The children are dying in there, Daeho shouted over the roar of the plasma fire. We are aware, Ta-jun replied evenly. But the temperature has reached 900 degrees. No human could survive those conditions. We must wait for the containment field to activate. Inside the room, Sunmi gathered the children close to the floor, where the temperature was slightly lower. Ji-won, the brave young Narai who had always been curious about humans, tried to keep the other children calm by changing her crystal form into pretty shapes. But even she couldn't hide the growing cracks in her structure. Haenul arrived, his crystal body analyzing the situation. The containment field is malfunctioning. The backup systems are not responding. Standard protocols have failed. How long until the children's structures completely fail? Daeho asked, dreading the answer. At current temperature rates, Haynul's body flickered with calculations. 3 minutes and 42 seconds until permanent crystal damage begins. Total structural failure in 5 minutes and 17 seconds. The other alien species on the station had gathered to watch. The plant-like verdants shook their leaves in distress. The gaseous aetheri swirled in agitation. But none moved to help. For them, entering that inferno would mean certain death. "The containment team is 8 minutes away," Taijun announced. His perfect crystal form showed no emotion, but his voice carried a note of resignation. "We must accept that." "No," Daho cut him off. "There has to be a way." He looked at his experimental suit again. He had been working on it for months, trying to adapt Earth's firefighting technology to work in space. It wasn't fully tested. The cooling systems might fail. The plasma shields might not hold. But as he watched Jai-1 try to comfort a smaller child whose crystal body was starting to splinter, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. "Hanul," he said quietly, "remember what we talked about how humans sometimes need to think with their hearts." Haynul's crystal form rippled with understanding. "Daho, the statistical probability of your survival is less than 12%. "Then I better hurry," Daho said, already running toward his quarters where the experimental suit waited, "because those kids have 0% chance if nobody helps them." Behind him, he heard the other aliens discussing his actions in their various languages. Most called him foolish. Some called him brave. All of them thought he was going to die. But none of that mattered. Because in his heart, Daho knew one simple truth. Sometimes being human meant doing the impossible, simply because it was right. Daho ran to his quarters, his heart pounding. The experimental suit hung in its charging station, its silver surface gleaming. He had tested it only twice before, and never in real plasma fire conditions. "This is highly illogical," Haynul said, following him inside. "The suit's protective systems are untested. You are rushing into certain death. Help me put it on," Daho replied, already strapping on the base layer. The suit was built from a mix of Earth and alien technology. Its outer layer could reflect most of the plasma fire's heat, while the inner cooling system would try to keep him alive. "The children have 3 minutes until permanent damage," Haynul stated, helping attach the chest piece despite his protests. "Even if you survive the heat, the plasma will eat through the suit's shields in approximately 4 minutes. Then I'll have to be fast." Daho checked the suit's power levels. The gauges showed full charge, but who knew how long that would last? Through his room's window, he could see the purple glow of the plasma fire growing stronger. The station's warning systems blared continuously, their red lights casting strange shadows. "Your species continues to confound me," Haynul said, helping attach the helmet. "You know the exact probability of death, yet you proceed anyway. Some things are worth dying for." Daho activated the suit's systems. Blue lights flickered across its surface as the shields powered up. "Besides, what would you do if those were your children in there?" Haynul's crystal form rippled with an emotion Daho had never seen before. I would wish to save them, but I would follow protocol." "That's the difference between us," Daho said, checking the suit's oxygen supply. "Humans don't always follow protocol. Sometimes we follow our hearts instead." Station Security Chief Taijun's voice came through the communicator. "Officer Kim, this is a direct order. Do not attempt rescue. Wait for the containment team." Daho looked at the suit's internal display. Temperature outside, 1,000 degrees and rising. Suit's maximum tested temperature, 800 degrees. Time until children's crystal structures fail, 2 minutes and counting. He took a deep breath. "Sorry, Chief, can't follow that order." "This is why your species is considered dangerous," Taijun replied. "You let emotions override logic. Maybe that's not always a bad thing." Daho stepped toward his door. "Haynul, if I don't make it back, tell Earth I did my best." Haenul's crystal form glowed with a mix of colors Daho had never seen before. I begin to understand why humans achieve so much despite their physical limitations, he said quietly. Your courage defies logic, yet it creates its own kind of strength. Keep the containment team coming, Daho said, starting to run back toward the education center. But don't wait for them to save those kids. Behind him, he heard Haenul speaking to the other aliens gathered in the corridor. Observe carefully, the Narai said. You are about to witness why humans are considered one of the most remarkable species in the galaxy. The experimental suit hummed around him as Daho ran toward the plasma fire. He had no idea if he would survive the next few minutes, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let those children die without trying to save them. Because that's what being human meant. The moment Daho stepped through the emergency doors into the education center, his suit's alarms screamed warnings. The temperature was already beyond its safety limits. Purple plasma flames danced across the ceiling, eating through the metal walls. Children, he shouted, activating his suit's external speakers. Everyone stay low to the ground. Through the thick smoke and plasma fire, he saw Sun Mei gathering the children in a corner. Their crystal bodies glowed dimly, showing dangerous stress patterns. Several of the youngest ones had deep cracks forming. A human cannot survive here, Sun Mei said, her own crystal form showing signs of damage. The temperature is hot enough to cook me, I know, Daho said, moving closer. His suit's cooling system worked overtime, but he could still feel the terrible heat. But I'm not leaving without those kids. Jai-1, despite her cracking crystal body, floated forward, like the Earth stories you told us, about brave firefighters. Exactly like that. Daho checked his suit's status. The outer shield was already starting to fail. I need all of you to trust me. Can you do that? The children's crystal bodies flickered with different colors. Fear, hope, and confusion all mixed together. Sun Mai spoke quietly to them in their native language, her crystal form pulsing with gentle light. They will trust you, she said finally, but their bodies are too fragile. Any sudden movement could shatter them. Daho's suit beeped another warning. The plasma fire had eaten through 20% of his shields already, but he forced himself to move slowly, carefully. One at a time, he said, reaching for the smallest child first. Hold your form as steady as you can. The young Narai, their crystal bodies now showing deep stress lines, formed a line. Daho picked up the first child, cradling them carefully against his suit's chest plate where the cooling systems were strongest. The containment team is 6 minutes out. Haenul's voice crackled through his radio. Suit integrity at 70% and falling. Copy that, Daho said, carefully carrying the first child toward the door. He could feel the heat increasing with every step. The plasma fire had nearly covered the entire ceiling now, dropping burning purple drops that hissed against his suit. First one coming out, he called, passing the child through the emergency doors where other Narai waited. 16 more to go. His suit's temperature gauge was now deep in the red zone. Sweat poured down his face inside his helmet, and every breath felt like drinking hot coffee. But he turned back into the inferno. Next one, he said, reaching for Jai-1. Remember what I told you about being brave. Jai-1's crystal body sparkled despite her damage. Humans say being brave doesn't mean not being scared. That's right. Daho smiled, though his face was tight with pain. It means doing what's right even when you're terrified. As he carried Jai-1 to safety, his suit's integrity dropped to 50%. The plasma fire roared louder, hungry for metal and flesh alike. But Daho Kim had made a promise to himself, and humans, despite their fragile bodies and short lives, were very good at keeping their promises. 8 children were safe. 9 remained trapped in the burning room. Daho's suit was falling apart. Suit integrity at 30%. Haenul warned through the crackling radio. Core temperature approaching critical levels. Daho could barely see through his helmet's visor anymore. The plasma fire had grown so intense that it created waves of purple light that distorted everything. His lungs burned with each breath, and his muscles screamed in protest. "How are the children's crystal structures?" he gasped, reaching for the next young Mirai. 7 minutes until total failure, Sunmai reported. Her own crystal form showed severe damage, but she refused to leave until all children were safe. Daho's suit beeped a new warning. The cooling system was starting to fail. He could feel the heat creeping through the inner layers now, turning his protective gear into an oven. "Officer Kim," Ta Jun's voice came through. "The containment team is still 5 minutes out. Your suit will fail before they arrive." "Then I'll work faster," Daho said, lifting another child. This one's crystal structure was so fragile that hairline cracks spread across their surface with each movement. Halfway to the door, his suit's left leg servo locked up. Daho stumbled, but kept his balance, protecting the child in his arms from any impact. "Suit malfunction," Haenul called out. "You must abort the rescue." "No." Daho forced his leg to move, dragging it forward step by step. "Not while there are still kids in danger." He delivered the child to safety, then turned back despite the warnings flashing across his visor. The suit was now more of a liability than protection, but he couldn't take it off. Without it, he would die instantly in the plasma fire. 6 children remaining, Sunmai reported. Her voice carried both hope and fear. Jai-1, who had refused to leave despite being rescued earlier, floated near the emergency doors. "Officer Kim, your body temperature is too high." She was right. Daho could feel his consciousness starting to fade around the edges. The suit's cooling system was barely working now, and each breath felt like swallowing fire. But he thought about his old captain back in Seoul, who had once carried 5 people from a burning building with 2 broken ribs. He remembered the firefighter's motto: "We risk a lot to save a lot." "Haenul," he called through the radio. "Remember when you asked why humans take risks?" "Now is not the time for philosophy," Haenul replied, his crystal form showing unprecedented concern. "This is why," Daho said, reaching for another child. "Because sometimes being human means doing the impossible." His suit creaked and groaned, the metal warping under the intense heat. Warning lights covered his entire visor now. But Daho kept moving, kept fighting. Because that's what humans did. They fought impossible odds. They defied logical limits. They saved lives, even at the cost of their own. And right now, 6 young lives were counting on exactly that kind of human stubbornness. Daho's world had shrunk to 3 things: the burning room, the children who needed saving, and the next step forward. His suit was barely functioning now, its systems failing one by one. "Suit integrity at 15%, Haenul reported. Internal temperature reaching fatal levels for human biology. 3 children remained. Sunmai helped guide them toward Daho, her crystal form now severely damaged. The plasma fire had turned the ceiling into a churning ocean of purple death. "The containment team reports they're 4 minutes out," Ta Jun announced. "The children have 2 minutes until total crystal failure," Sunmai countered. Daho reached for the next child, his movements slower now. The suit's left arm had stopped working completely, hanging useless at his side. He could feel his skin blistering beneath the suit's inner layer. "Almost there," he whispered to the frightened young Mirai in his right arm. "Just hold on." The trip to the door seemed longer each time. His vision blurred, and his legs shook with each step. But he kept moving. "Suit power failing," the computer warned. "Life support systems critical." Jai-1, still watching from the doorway, suddenly made a decision. Her damaged crystal form glowed with determination as she floated back into the burning room. "Jai-1, no," Haenul called out. But the young Mirai had seen something the adults hadn't. She transformed her crystal structure into a reflective shield, helping to protect Daho from the worst of the plasma fire. "Humans help others," she said, her voice strong despite her cracking form. "So we help humans too." The other rescued children followed her lead. Despite their injuries, they formed a crystal barrier between Daho and the plasma fire. Their combined shields bought him precious seconds. Last two, Sunmai called, bringing the final children forward. Daho's suit was literally melting now. Warning signals filled his helmet, but he could barely read them through his darkening vision. His right arm trembled as he lifted the second-to-last child. "One more trip," he gasped. "Just one more." The children's crystal shield held, their young bodies glowing with effort and pain. They were risking their own safety to help him, just as he had risked his for them. "Containment team 3 minutes out," Ta-Jun reported. "Final child's crystal structure failing," Sunmai warned. Daho forced his burning legs to move. Just one more child. One more trip through hell. He could do this. He had to do this. Because that's what being human meant. Not giving up. No matter what. Daho woke up in the medical bay 3 days later. The first thing he saw was Jaewon's crystal form floating near his bed, her structure already starting to heal. "The human is awake," she called out excitedly, her body sparkling with happy blue lights. Yoon Seo, the human medical officer, rushed over. "You had severe burns over 60% of your body," she said, checking his vitals. "We almost lost you twice." "The children." Daho's voice was rough, his throat still raw from the heat. "All 17 survived," Haenul said, stepping into view. His crystal form showed new patterns Daho had never seen before. "Their structures are healing. Thanks to you, none suffered permanent damage." Daho tried to smile, but even that hurt. "The suit." "Completely destroyed," Haenul replied. "But it proved something important. Your design worked long enough to save lives." Through the medical bay's window, Daho could see a crowd gathering. Aliens from every species on the station were there. The gaseous Aetheri, the plant-like Verdans, even the usually reclusive quantum minds. They all wanted to see the human who had defied death to save children not of his species. "The station council has reviewed your actions," Ta-Jun said, entering the room. His crystal form showed newfound respect. While they were highly illogical and against all protocols, they were also remarkable. "The children helped too," Daho said, remembering how they had formed a shield for him. "They showed real courage." "They learned it from you," Sunmai said, her fully healed crystal form glowing warmly. "Now all young Narai want to learn about human firefighters." Jaewon floated closer, her crystal form shifting into various Earth emergency vehicles. "I want to be brave like humans when I grow up." "The council has approved a new program," Haenul announced. "We will begin incorporating human emergency response techniques into our standard protocols. Sometimes, it seems, emotion and instinct are as valuable as logic." Daho looked at the gathering crowd of aliens, at the healing children, at his friends old and new. His body hurt everywhere, but his heart was full. "You know what's funny?" he said to Haenul. "Back on Earth, people often ask why we want to go to space. They think aliens will be too different, that we'll never understand each other." "And now?" Haenul asked. "Now I know that some things are universal. Courage, compassion, the desire to help others." Daho watched Jaewon teach other young Narai how to shape their crystal forms into Earth firefighting equipment. "Maybe that's why humans belong out here. Not because we're the strongest or smartest, but because you show us that impossible things become possible when someone is brave enough to try." Haenul finished. His crystal form glowed with what could only be described as pride. "Welcome home, Daho Kim." And in that moment, surrounded by aliens who had become family, Daho knew that he was exactly where he belonged.